Hey guys, it is October 8th, 2017, and this is your episode 115 of Percussion. I'm your host, Casey Cangelosi, and with me as usual are Laurel Black.
Hi.
And Megan Arns.
Hello.
Ben, how's it going, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you?
Just fine. I just listened to Laurel play a tuba recital.
Woo! She played tuba?
I played piano, not...
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, just to be clear, yeah, she played piano. So, yeah, so shout out to my colleague Kevin Stees. Great recital, very fun, lots of students there, and yeah, it's fun to learn. It's fun to learn new rep. So we've got 3 guests today, and depending on how this conversation goes, you guys may see that we're splitting this episode into 2. There'll be maybe a part 1 and a part 2. So we'll do our best to make these links correct, but our 3 guests today are all expert Latin percussion specialists and hand drummers, and we're really happy to have them on the show to congratulate and celebrate their new CD titled Bacchini. I hope I said that right. This is going to be an episode of, let's see how many things Casey mispronounces in all these musics and tunes and terms that we're going to have. So it's called Bacchini, Music in the New World. There's a ton to say about each of these guys as individuals, but let's just go ahead and get started. We've got Mike Mixtacki, Joe Galvin, and the legendary Michael Spiro. Hey, everybody.
Hey there. For having us.
Sorry, that was a pretty lame introduction, but I thought there's so much we could say, and it'd probably be better if people just looked you guys up. Yeah, so congratulations on the CD. How long has this been out?
Well, let's see. Officially released the 22nd of September, so I guess 2 weeks only. So we're still pretty excited. In other words,
hot off the press.
Yeah, well, congratulations. It sounds really, really good. And something I wanted to ask right off the bat is you have this great little paragraph here. There's just great information in the notes. It's cool to see a CD with such great liner notes. And I just want to read a quick passage for everyone. Due to the variety of specific forms and genres in each selection, meaning the tracks and pieces, we're including a stylistic roadmap that accompanies and explains each piece. It will outline the development of the suite as it progresses from one form of instrumentation to another, and hopefully help orient the listener to the multitude of genres, both traditional and original, that make up the entire composition. I think this is so cool that you guys have chosen such a pedagogical approach to the whole CD. How did that happen?
I think the thing is that we try to be creative artists, and yet we are working within genres that are very traditional at the same time, and so we feel that we owe it to a newcomer to the musics that we're playing to give them some idea of when we're trying to play it exactly like how it's supposed to go versus, okay, now here's our completely messed up take on it all, with our own creativity, if you will. So we feel like it's important to try to just basically orient the listener, much as if you were to take a classical marimba piece and start morphing it as it went along to where it ends up being completely Casey Cangelosi. But let's say I'm not a marimbist and I don't know the material. I'd like to know when that happened and in the piece, and when you started to decide that you could mess it all up. And so that's kind of what the roadmaps are about, if that helps.
That absolutely helps. I love so much that you did this, and I don't know how you guys all feel, but one of the reasons I still buy physical CDs is for the liner notes.
Yeah.
I just think it's such a valuable thing to extract program notes from, and I mean, this is a perfect example of, hey, this is exactly why you should buy a physical CD. Ben, what do you have there?
Can I co-sign that?
Yeah.
because we spent a lot of time on the liner notes, and for those exact reasons. In the modern era where you just download the music, like, I'm an old man, I'm in my mid 60s, and I remember where you'd buy an album and then just fiend on the back cover with all the notes and who played on it and what was being said, and and that was so important to your listening experience when you put the vinyl on the turntable. I know those are two words that nobody would have ever heard of anymore, but liner, and not to mention, I can't tell you how much I learned from liner notes. They really taught as much, as much as being sort of entertainment. Blue note liner notes, if you were a jazz player or whatever, could give you a ton of knowledge and information. So I am really appreciative of your commenting on the liner notes, because that's something that we really spent a lot of time on and took care with for all those reasons. So I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, I had a question that came from reading the liner notes, and we also had a little comment that was left on Casey's Facebook post from Joe Santo. I think I'm saying that correctly.
John Santo.
John Santo, sorry. And he said, Maestro Spiro, my teacher. In fact, we got him so early he might fess up to the fact that we helped make him the teacher he is. Key point, he was a killer player before becoming an educator. Many aren't. And in the liner notes, I was surprised to read that this IU Afro-Cuban percussion ensemble was founded, I think it was in 2008, and then 3 years later was a PAS International Percussion Ensemble Competition winner. So, Michael, could you tell us about your beginnings of a career specifically as an educator and your sort of growing pains that took?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. By the way, John Santo is a very old and dear friend and percussionist in the San Diego Symphony for many, many years. And I don't know that I ever felt any growing pains. He's being, he's being a little humorous here. I never set out to be a teacher. It was never a goal of mine. But when you start to play and you're playing a gig and somebody comes up to you and says, hey, can you teach me how to blah, blah, blah? And you go, I guess so. What are you doing on Tuesday at 3? And so it just kind of happened that people would ask if I could show them something, and well, I'll show you what I know, or as much of it as I know at any rate. And then I think John's point that not all teachers are players and not all players are teachers. And apparently I had some success at both. And that just kind of led to a couple of, I taught at San Diego State University way back in the 80s, even though I hadn't set out to be an educator or to be in the academy. That's when I met John. And, then one little teaching gig, I can't even call it adjunct, but what for the moment we can call it that, led to another, which led to another. And then I was out being a guest artist at a lot of schools. And then somehow or other I ended up in Bloomington, Indiana, being a professor. But it was never something I set out to do. It was all just kind of happened, if you will.
I think maybe that's why you're good at it, is that you didn't set out just to do that.
Could be. My goal was always to be as the best player that I could be. But then I always felt that learning and knowledge and education was a critical function of that. So I don't in any way want to demean or belittle all the studying, both musically and, if you will, historically, academically, ethnomusicologically, that I've done. I don't want to demean that in any way, because that's what informs your playing. So I certainly don't want to give the impression that I don't value my education and my studying. Quite the contrary, if you will.
Yeah, great. Hey, before we leave the liner notes or diverge too far from the liner notes, I wanted to add that there's a glossary. I love this. There's a glossary of terms at the end of the liner notes. And something I thought would be fun to do would maybe be, I will throw out a term and we can let one of our experts say whatever comes to mind, or maybe how it relates to the CD itself. And we'll do that soon. But maybe first, I thought I'd love to hear, let's say from Mike Mixtacki, if you would just tell us, how did you three get together? I know you're a student of Mr. Spiro's, but how did this CD happen? Because you're in Texas teaching right now with Miss Rubens, right?
I am. Yeah, I just started a year ago at UTSA, University of Texas, San Antonio. I was before that at Northern Illinois University, so I was about a 5-hour drive away from Bloomington. And before that, I was a grad student at IU, and basically some of the first real exposure I had to like these creative arrangements of Afro-Cuban music was when Mr. Spiro and I were co-directing also with Joe the IU Afro-Cuban Folkloric Ensemble. So that was sort of where the three of us found ourselves. I actually, oddly enough, when I was a senior in high school, met Michael at Birch Creek, the percussion and steel band session, where he gave me a conga drum lesson for way less money than he would normally charge. And I'm still very grateful.
Oh, man. Really?
Yeah, I know.
Oh.
He's going to send me a bill.
I was going to say, yeah, you can settle that up now.
It's not too late, yeah.
He was actually a guest artist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I was an undergrad. And so I saw him all the time, and I started chasing him down in San Francisco for more lessons. And he was probably real annoyed with me. But then when he started working at IU, it was right around the time I was graduating. So it was sort of kind of perfect timing. So I became his grad assistant for a few years and then hung around in Bloomington, where actually the three of us co-started a Latin jazz, Caribbean jazz group together, which then became sort of our project for probably it was about 5 years, right, guys? Ritmos Unidos?
Yeah.
I think it was 5 years, something like that.
Are you guys doing a show around PASIC time again this year? Anywhere?
Oh, we wish.
Yeah, not this year, unfortunately.
Bummer.
Yeah, sadly, now that we all live in much farther away as opposed to slightly farther away places, it's hard for us to get together and do that kind of thing again. But yeah, that's kind of how the three of us kind of started making some music together, which actually was through this ensemble at IU. And then we realized, hey, this is fun. And the three of us started playing a lot of bata drums outside of class, if you will. And it became kind of our obsession because we had this great teacher. Joe and I had this fantastic teacher who was just, really gracious with his time and gracious with his knowledge. And we were able to soak up a whole lot of stuff that I don't know how else we would have done it. So, and it led to, learning many things, including all that terminology, which I may say about the liner notes. I only was, if you want to say, I was basically a singer and a little bit of an arranger on this project. They did all the hard work. And when I finally saw the final copy, I was like, look, if anyone wants to teach a class on Afro-Cuban music, just use these liner notes as the book. Yeah. Because this is literally like, you want to learn about what's going on and whether it's actually Brazilian music, Cuban music, Trinidadian music. If you look through those notes, there's terminology of everything that you could imagine. So I think Joe wants to add to that.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on that just to point out that we probably spent, I don't want to say equal amount of time on the writing.
I need a drink.
We did on the recording, but the liner notes being a huge part of that and the glossary being a huge part, that we spent so much time to try and make sure that the information was accurate and on point. and ready to go. It started long before we ever recorded a note. The writing for this started, 2.5 years ago, in the form of grant proposals and sabbatical proposals and figuring out what a listener would need to know before we ever recorded the first note. So that's an important part, and I'm glad Mixtacki brought that up.
Yeah.
Speaking of books, there's yet another Michael we need to bring up here, and that is my dear friend Michael D'Angelo, who I know is a student at IU as well. And I had Mike as a guest artist, I guess it was maybe it was last year, 2 years ago at this point, and he's coming back this semester. But last time I saw Mike, he was telling me that he was working on writing a book with Mr. Spiro here, I think, or something like that. He was taking lessons and transcribing a bunch of stuff and compiling it into some sort of packet. Am I making this up? I'm getting a weird look.
Yeah, I wasn't making it up, but Mike did a semester with me here. I'm not the drum set teacher here at Indiana University. That's Steve Houghton. But Mike did a semester with me, and I make all my students do a journal, throughout the semester. But the journal is a pretty thorough thing, and Mike's journal was just fantastic, and it was really good. And I said to him, before he left here and went to the Carolinas, I said, man, you ought to try to figure out a way to tighten that up, and you could call it a little overview of, because there's Cuban drumming, there's Brazilian drumming, there's like an overview, if you will. And I said, you could tighten that up and make a little project out of that might go a long way to helping people learn how to teach drum set, as in an overview kind of thing, not in a lot of depth in any one form, but as an overview of how the drum set fits into African diasporic music. And that conversation was probably 1.5 years ago, and we haven't talked since, just because we're so busy. So that's why I don't know that you made it up, but I'm not exactly sure that it's a full reality yet.
Gotcha.
He made it up. I think he made it up. I think he's tooling on the podcast. That's what I think. I think he's laughing right now.
Well, we all get busy, and there's so many things going on in life, and we really should get together and make chicken enchiladas. That's a great idea. And then 12 years later, we never made the chicken enchiladas.
I'm very hungry.
So I want to test out this idea of mine and throw out a glossary term. This is probably the part of the episode where I pronounce a lot of things wrong.
Can we laugh out loud at you? Is that okay?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So, Oricha, how's that?
That's pretty good, actually.
Oh, good. Okay. So this is a word for deity. Though a sacred entity, each Oricha represents an aspect of nature as well as some part of the human experience here on Earth.
Yeah.
So if any thoughts come to mind,
we were waiting for the. And so what I want to ask is, all right, we're going to let Joe take
Right. So I guess what I want to ask is, in which arrangement or tune or track does that term come into play?
Well, it informs the entire album, but specifically the first suite, I Got You suite, and the last suite, Oya suite, which is a large chunk of the album. The only thing that's not that is the piece in the middle, Maracambique. So Maracambique is a secular piece. It's carnival music. It combines carnival musics from Cuba, Brazil, and Trinidad to just show how everybody likes to party. The other pieces, the rest of the album, then, is inspired by all the music for the Orishas. The first suite, I Got You, is one of the Orishas from the Lukumi faith. And I Got You, as you said in the glossary terms, each Orisha owns a aspect of nature and an aspect of humanity in archetypal ways. So Agayu is the giant and the ferryman, and also owners of the volcano. So the first, however many tracks that is in the album, 7, are all pieces inspired by the folkloric music to Agayu that we've recombined or presented in its traditional form and then recombined. The back half of the album, where Mixtacki is our lead singer, is for Oya, which is another Oricha. She's the goddess of the hurricane, as we're seeing plenty of right now, and the whirlwind, and she's the female warrior and a very strong and powerful Oricha, and her music demonstrates that as well. So hopefully that wraps that up.
By the way, parenthetically, your pronunciation of the word is basically the Cuban pronunciation because of Spanish. So they will say the Oricha like a CH. In Africa and in Nigeria, it's spelled O-R-I-S-A, and there's a dot under the S, which makes it Oricha like S-H. So you'll hear that, Oricha. In Brazil, the SH sound is an X, like if you're playing the kashishi, right? Mm-hmm. So Brazil, the Oricha are the Oricha with an X, and sometimes they will say the Oricha with an accent on the last A. So the Oricha is pretty much the Cuban because of Spain pronunciation.
I did it that way on purpose.
That's right. We knew.
I meant to.
That's why we applauded so loudly. It was.
Yeah, for sure. Megan, do you have something there? We'll do terms again. If anybody gets bored, just say, Casey, throw a term out.
Keep doing terms.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I have like 8 things, and I'm going to try to just choose one. But I just kind of wanted to pick all of your brains, but especially Michael's, about ethnomusicology. I have a background in ethnomusicology as well, and so I'm curious of how the performance side of ethnomusicology. I guess what are your thoughts on the current field of ethnomusicology and applied ethnomusicology, and where do you think there could be room for improvement in the field, or where do you wish or hope that it could go, if anything? And also, another part of that question is that you were at University of Washington for ethno.
Yeah.
And I was just curious if you knew Dumisani at all Marare when you were there.
No, I was there. Do you know? I was there 78 to 80.
Okay.
And Dumi was sort of preceded me. He had started this whole, Zimbabwean marimba tradition in Seattle, Washington.
Yeah.
And like there were all these, it's 1978, I get to Seattle and there's all these African marimba gigs going on in town. And I'm like going, what planet am I on? What it's pouring rain out. It's 36 degrees, and everybody's bouncing around on stage playing marimbas. And then, of course, Dumi had, of course, brought the Mbira with him. Uh-huh. But Dumi kind of preceded me in that sense. He was still there maybe in the city, when I first got there in 78, but he was kind of had done his thing and was on his way. Actually, I don't even know where he went. But Dumi was significantly responsible for basically all of the African marimba music that was taking place in the Pacific Northwest, because it migrated from Seattle to Portland, to Olympia, Washington. And so he had a very profound effect, actually.
It's incredible.
On the music of the Northwest, but he kind of preceded me.
Okay. Did you interact? Go ahead.
I'm happy to talk about ethno, but why don't I go last? Why don't we let Joe and Mike talk first, and then maybe I'll try to say something nice after that. Mike?
I guess maybe I'm the least qualified person to talk about, ethnomusicology in the academy. I never actually took many classes in it. I was always interested in, what does this long word really mean? Mm-hmm. I think I figured it out over time. You're really just trying to get as much background and as much information and as much depth to what you play as possible. So I was always approaching ethno, if you will, from a player standpoint, learning to play congas, learning to play bata, learning to play samba, fill in the blank. And I was always curious, well, why? What is this? Where is this coming from, and why is it coming from there as opposed to over here? And why is it this term, and why is it an X instead of a CH? You know, that was me, but I was always like, okay, cool. Now I have that, and I can kind of file it in my brain. I never, I guess, really went the extra mile to do a lot of academic writing about it. So maybe like that doesn't make me the most qualified person to talk about ethnomusicology, but I really appreciate the field, and I appreciate what, you know, what it does for both players and academics, if you will, people who are kind of approaching it from both sides. I think something the three of us talk about a lot is if you want to be able to talk about or really feel informed about a certain music, it's worth at least trying to learn some of it and playing it in some form. I think that's what we always have said is like, you want to learn about some bata drums? Go ahead and sit down and play them. And it may be the most painful and whatever, you know, thing that you've tried, but at least you've learned about the music itself. And that's something I think we've had a lot of conversations about that in particular, but maybe Joe, I'll let you kind of tag this one.
Sure. I think that's absolutely true. I think the flip side of that is you can't just learn the drum. And I don't care what culture you're coming from, be it Western, classical, or Chinese, or Afro-Cuban, or whatever. You can't just learn the drum. You have to learn something about where that drum fits into society and the world. So that you can't have one without the other. You can approach it from more of a player standpoint, or you can approach it from more of an academic standpoint, but you need to have both without question.
Right.
I'm like Mike here, where I didn't go to school for ethnomusicology. I did my studies as a performer, but I did a minor field in ethno, so I might not have a foot in that realm, but at least a toe. And in those classes, I think modern ethnomusicology studies, there is a lot of participation. There's not this insider-outsider problem quite as much. Everyone knows it's far more complex than that.
Yeah.
But at least here at IU, it's a unique school where the ethnomusicology department is completely separated out from the music school, and musicology is completely separated out from ethnomusicology. And I think hopefully we can move beyond that to a point where if you're going to go study any style of music, you're going to study musicology. Why we label it as ethno seems like last century. I think the point where so many things are mixed together, like we did on the CD, where we're blending marimbas with bata, with flute and violin and all sorts of stuff. It's all musicology, at least to me. Spiro?
Interesting.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay. Put on your black jackets. Incoming. I'm going to piggyback on Joe. I guess in a nutshell, my opinion is I don't understand why there is a field called ethnomusicology. I'm piggybacking on Joe. The study of music in its cultural context. What music wouldn't you do that in? So to me, ethnomusicology actually is somewhat of a neo-colonial term. Well, there's Western canon, and of course we study Western music history and where Beethoven, Mozart, etc. fit in. In fact, you can't get a degree in music from any school, at least in the United States, without your music history and musicology classes. So ethnomusicology, do you mean the music of those other people, is a whole separate department? A whole separate, That makes no sense to me. So the study of music within its culture, that should be true whether it's Jay-Z, Beethoven, Beyonce or Agayu suites. So I have all kinds of issues then with the silo thing of musicology, ethnomusicology, and music performance all being separate things, because to me, to be a performer and a writer and a creator and an arranger requires knowledge of all of that. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I almost, wonder, though, if in this way, having a separate Black studies field or having like a women's group for, NPAS or whatever, these subgenres are kind of formed because people are underrepresented. And I wonder, because, I wish that in my music history class, we talked about West African music, or we talked, there was not a lot of focus on music from the entire world in my music studies in a state school or in a conservatory, or a liberal arts school. And that's frustrating,
That's a very fair comment. Underrepresentation would then require, but in my experience, except for schools like Wesleyan, back in the old days, and it was UCLA Wesleyan, where they actually brought master artists to their school to teach and represent that music. Just a bunch of academicians sitting around writing papers and arguing over the semiotics of music as a way of creating a discipline. I don't know if that accomplishes what you suggested.
Yeah.
And so while I think what you said is very true, I'm not sure that the reality of it has necessarily reflected the way you put it.
Yeah.
Anybody else wish to weigh in on this?
I have one little thing. I know I can probably add the least of anybody to this, but there was some episode, I can't for the life of me remember which one it was, but I reported on a little news story, and some archaeologists discovered some new like broken pottery set in a cave somewhere. And if you guys remember, part of them figuring out what they found was they had to collaborate with an acoustician, so someone studying the reverberations of the space, and someone also studying the reverberation principles of the actual pottery itself. So archaeologist, acoustician, and of course ethnomusicologist. So that, to me, I wonder if that's why there is this other utility that us performers don't see very often, because we don't pay attention to archaeology, we don't pay attention to the sciences, I just wonder if, maybe it's that.
Well, what if I said that it's a tragedy that most musicians don't use their intellect? Then, I mean,
yeah, sure.
In other words, all of us right now, you're in your office, apparently, I think, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm in mine. We're at a university. Aren't we supposed to be thinking and reading and questioning in addition to practicing and being performers? And so if what you say is true, that's very sad. In other words, I can run up and down the bars of the marimba at 1,000 miles an hour, but I don't know where Myanmar is because I never bothered to take a geography class or whatever when I was in school. I think that's a tragedy. We're supposed to, learn about the world. And to me, the term ethnomusicology is simply saying learn about the music you play within the culture that it comes from.
Mm-hmm. Sure, absolutely. And I guess I'm thinking back to this news story, thinking if they were to call on me, hey, can you help us figure out what we're looking at here? I would be clueless. I would be really, of course would be clueless. They're trying to figure out if these broken pieces of these artifacts they found are a drum or some ceremonial thing or what they are. And it makes me think, man, the first person I would call is Megan, because she's the ethnomusicologist I know. And then I'd call Michael Spiro, it's...
But one can't know everything, right? So, I mean, sure. I would be the same as you. Like,
call Megan.
well, where's it from, and what culture is it from, and how do we know where pottery fit into their, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, you can't know everything, for Lord's sake, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm a person. Casey said that he has the least to add about this. I feel like I have very little to add. I've had maybe 3 classes about non-Western music and 2 of those were not required. I took them by choice. But I've always been very intimidated because I feel a responsibility that, no, I don't just get to memorize rhythms and say, like, yeah, I know Afro-Cuban music. I've always felt that that's not a respectful way to treat the music. And then I feel kind of easily defeated in a way, realizing like how much I feel I should learn about it, in order to play it, in order to teach it. And I'm wondering if you guys, like, what would you say to me, or because any person like me, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that. Well,
it's overwhelming. There's a lot,
and I have respect for it, which is why it's like, I'm gonna dive in when I feel like I have the time to dive in.
Well, one thing that Spiro has taught us, Mixtacki and I, and all of our students here that come through IU and everywhere else that Mixtacki and all of us are teaching, is especially for Western students who have been in the academy and the Western music system for their entire lives, come in and go, I want to learn Afro-Cuban music, for example, but pick any music. We turn around and say, give this style of music that you're about to study the same time and respect that you've given what you've already studied. And what Casey said is that can be overwhelming. Yes, it can. There's too much music in the world. So taking one class, one lesson on timbales ain't going to cut it. And if it took 14 years to learn to play the marimba, then it's going to take you that long to learn to play the imbira. It's going to take you that long to learn to play bata. Every style of music around the world is extremely deep. So give it its due, and then know that you can't learn all of it. So pick the ones you like that really move you and go with those. It just so happens that the ones that we've picked have been Afro-Cuban, Afro-Brazilian, steel pan, marimba for certain people, timpani for others, and it's all good. There's not one that's better than another, but all of them take a lifetime to study.
I think, if I may just jump in, I think the really hard part that I probably faced myself, and I know a lot of my students and sort of colleagues, people who have gone through some of these same, I guess, maybe I'll call it growing pains of learning new types of music when you already feel grown up. I'm 20-some, like you're in college, you're 20-some years old, you already have a good handle on how to play the snare drum, but somebody puts a pandeiro in your hand and you go,
maracas,
no idea what this is. Yeah, and you feel like a little baby at that particular instrument. So of course there's like technical study, and of course there's just time that goes into it that you're like, well, look, I already know how to hold sticks. Why can't I play this fill in the blank? So I think that can be really difficult for students. I think it can be difficult for anybody, non-students, anyone who's trying to approach something new, especially when they've been learning other styles and watching those sort of grow and mature over the course of their life. Well, it's like, well, why can't I pick this up? Because it's completely different. It has everything and yet nothing to do with all the other stuff that you play. So I have had a lot of situations where whether it be with a student of mine or like just learning something for myself, where it's like, man, I feel like a kid again. I feel like I'm 6 years old trying to pick up this particular technique, and it can be really frustrating. I think it's a big hurdle. So that's when Joe says, yeah, one timbale lesson isn't going to cut it. It's true. It's like, I literally just learned that playing on these metal shells is completely different than playing on a classic drum head. So all of a sudden, that in itself is one thing you think about. But I will add that the thing we've been talking about a lot, which is the depth of study, the background of study, the cultural information, all of the ethnomusicological info that goes into learning a certain instrument or a certain style or a certain technique, I think can actually make that process a little more rewarding instead of totally scary.
Yeah, well said.
Good point.
It seems to me that this conversation is a good demonstration of the word appreciation. We teach a class called music appreciation. It's very general. And yeah, sure, like Joe said, one timbali lesson is not going to cut it, but it might give you an appreciation for what's there.
Amen.
Yeah, so I think of someone like myself who hasn't done the true study one of these instruments needs. Yeah, just being exposed to it, having a lesson here or there. Yeah, of course, it doesn't cut it as a performer, but it might give you an appreciation for it, which you can pass on to your students, and then they can know whether to actually pursue it for real or not.
Yeah, and it can also fulfill your own life. I mean, an overview of anything from cuisine to painting, right? So I don't think you have to feel intimidated by anybody, because you sat at a tabla for 2 hours when it's a 2-century long study. But, just to go, oh my Lord, I can't get one sound out of this. That's pretty informative, isn't it? So yeah, there's good reason for overview appreciation classes. And then, as Joe said, whatever makes your heart go thumpity thump, that's what you end up, going after. So you could teach somebody to play just a straight ahead jazz swing beat, and they would never even know necessarily where that came from or the history of New Orleans or anything, unless it floated their boat and they wanted to pursue that.
I'll add to that. I think there's a big difference between exposure and appreciation and trying to learn something to be able to disseminate it yourself.
Oh boy.
And finding that line is very tricky to find. But I think that music appreciation classes and world music classes are wonderful. I think the pitfall is when students take a 1-semester class that does a very brief cursory look at music from all over, and they go, I'm ready to go teach A-way drumming now. Like, slow your roll. And know that when you walk into those classes, that with exposure and appreciation has to come an understanding of the depth of those musics. I guess that's all I was trying to get across.
And I guess that's what I like about the word appreciation. It clarifies, because I feel like when we taught that class, that was one of the first things we had to clarify is, okay, what we're trying to do here. Like, the reason we're going to teach you some fundamentals of reading music is not so you can just run out and start playing gigs. It's so you can just get a little lens into what's involved in this.
Well, and talk about the music a little more intelligently as well.
Yeah.
I taught an online history of rock course over the summer. It was the same thing. The first lesson is all about, all the basic building blocks of music, and then can you apply that to the Beatles and, their everything thereafter.
I love teaching those classes. I know some teachers dread it, but it's such a valuable thing. I mean, it's low stakes because it's not like their careers and gigs are on the line. It's not like there's auditions on the line. You just get to expose them to things that you like and you think are cool, and hopefully get them excited about history of rock or classical music or world music or whatever. Ben, I think you've had a question for a while now. Sorry.
I'm trying to figure out how to ask what I'm trying to ask here.
All that time you haven't figured it out?
Well, whenever I loved what Joe said about, he said there are too many musics in the world, for one lifetime anyway. And whenever people start talking about ethnomusicology, I start to get self-conscious because the two biggest studies in ethnomusicology seem to be Latin / Afro-Cuban / Brazilian sort of music and African music, and I've never really studied either of those in depth. But my journey took me through South Indian music and Indonesian gamelan music were my two big ethno areas that I studied. And all this talk is making me think of one of my favorite albums is called Mondo Head by the group Kodo, and it was produced by Mickey Hart, who is the drummer for the Grateful Dead. And the thing that's amazing about that album is it takes so many different traditions. There's Brazilian musicians on it, there's Indian musicians, there's, of course, the taiko drummers, and all these different people playing together, and it just sounds like it works. It sounds like that's what it was designed to be. So for our guests, can you tell us about some of the more interesting cross-cultural collaborations you've done?
Okay, I want to back up before I answer that. Ethnomusicology actually, certainly for many, many decades, focused much more on gamelan and North Indian music, Carnatic music, than Latin music and African music. Mantlehood at UCLA, a lot of the gamelan was a big, big part of the early stages of ethnomusicology, as was Indian classical music, both North and South. So don't feel so bad, in other words. The blending of musics for me, the one record I did that took two cultures and put them together, even though they really don't have anything in common. I made a record called Bata Mbira, which combined Afro-Cuban folkloric music with the Mbira from Zimbabwe, only because when I met the man who I did that with, B. Michael Williams, who just retired from Winthrop University, he played and sang Shona music for me, and all I could hear in my head was all these bata rhythms accompanying it. So it was purely an aesthetic response that I had to what he was doing, and that made me suggest to him that we make this record. But normally when I blend styles, it's because I think they have not only aesthetic components, but historical and musicological components that allow that to not only allow, but sometimes demand that it happen. And I'll turn that over to somebody else.
It's a case-by-case basis, I feel, when that works and when that doesn't. I think a really good example is when Latin jazz was just starting out, and we look at the early experimentations, the feel of the two different styles back in like the 30s and 40s, where salsa or pre-salsa music pushes very hard on the beat, and jazz kind of sits back on the beat. And when the first players got together to try and play it, there was a clash. If you listen to original recordings of Manteca, it's really funny to listen to each section push and pull against each other. And eventually it gets worked out, and an entire genre of music, Latin jazz, develops and proliferates. But that's a good example of how it gets a little kind of pushes against each other at first. So there are times when it works, like when Spiro's saying, oh, well, those aesthetically will fit really well together, and times where I think it gets really forced. And people are like, no, we're going to put didgeridoo with tabla, and it's going to be awesome. And it's,
I think specifically one of the things that I was really interested in as like towards the end of my graduate studies, I learned some songs and rhythms for one particular Oricha in a lesson that I just automatically heard strings in my head. And so went ahead and attempted to write a piece for Bata and String Quartet, which I did on my master's recital, which if I went back and, wanted to revise it, I would probably have a lot of changes. But I think a lot of that, the question you're sort of asking is like, what works, what doesn't? I think it's all about experimenting, and it's all about just sort of throwing some stuff out and going, hey, is this going to work? I think the thing that we've experimented with the most when you think about, really our band Ritmos Unidos, several years ago was a pretty good example of this Venn diagram of like Cuba, Brazil, and Trinidad. And we would play a lot of stuff that really was right in the middle of that. Joe is a fantastic pan player, and we basically were able to kind of like see where the overlap from all these musics were, and much of it just because it came from all the same, the same place. It all came from the transatlantic slave trade. So here we are going, well, essentially all these musics are cousins in some way. So let's figure out a cool way to go back and forth or put them on top of each other or next to each other or whatever. And a lot of it just comes from making the time to experiment, which is, I think, in a sense, what part of putting this album together was over the course of, many years of, well, okay, here's an arrangement that we did. Like, for example, the second half of the Bakini CD is this suite called Oya Suite, which actually we had performed together at the concert, at the PASIC Showcase concert in 2011. And in part of it was, hey, what if we put marimbas here? And Spiro, that was kind of like, I came to him and said, I want to do this. Like, let's put some marimbas in there. And he goes, okay, we'll figure it out. So we got in a room with some, plenty of people who can play marimba. And we were just trying to experiment. It was like, well, what if we put this bata rhythm on these notes and do these particular set of chord changes? Would these go along to this song or not? And I think, there's not a good answer to say, well, what works and what doesn't. It's just, you got to just make decisions along the way and feel good about, yeah, you know what, we did our homework, we did some experimenting, and this is what we came up with. So let's give this a shot.
But I want to jump in there because that word homework, yes, it's about experimenting, but it's also about years and years of doing homework. Because unlike, and I'm sorry to say this, I apologize, I don't, but we're having discussion here. Unlike other people who just kind of take a bunch of genres and throw them together, those tend not to work for me. But the homework of what is the relationship between Trinidadian, Brazilian, and Cuban music? Oh, that's right. It comes from this tree based on the transatlantic slave trade, that there are commonalities there. So you have to spend years and years and years of doing homework before you can experiment, in my opinion, because you can, of course, take Bulgarian folk music and play find a Tammy Wynette tune that might fit it, but you're not likely to. And so I think that it's experimenting based on what? A lot of knowledge that you have to bring to the table before you start the experiment.
Knowledge from every style that you're trying to blend. So what Mixtacki was saying of, yeah, we tried marimbas with bata rhythms. Well, that's because there's a bata expert and there's a marimba expert, and okay, now we can start to put these together, as opposed to, oh, what sound cool is this style of music we know nothing about. Let's try and put that on marimbas. That's crossing the line, at least for us.
Right.
And not to mention, oh yeah, and there's a song that goes on top of it that doesn't normally have harmony, but we're going to add it and then figure out another more complex harmony to put underneath all of it. Like, that's, you got to have, in a way, a lot of people involved.
It
so
seems to me,
that's something we certainly run into. Sorry, Casey.
No, thanks. It seems to me the key thing here about if you've successfully crossed into, sorry, what am I trying to say? The key thing, if you've successfully crossed one genre with another or one style with another, is arrangement. So we've all probably been in that case where we see a classical string quartet and they just decide to read a jazz chart and they play it not like jazz at all, and they don't really know what to do. Like, is there a way to take that jazz tune, arrange it, and I mean arranging as far as Nancy Zeltzman talks about arranging, which means you do a whole lot to it, and you can make those classical players still feel like classical players, but we hear a successful crossing of the genres. They're not just porting it straight to it, but the arrangement is actually done with a lot of care and with homework, and it's done really well so that they are crossed. It's like, yes, we have classical players playing jazz,
This reminds me of like one of my least favorite things is these things always pop up on Facebook of someone playing like Beethoven 5 with some sort of clave rhythm under it. It's like, just stop. It's so bad. And like people think that's so cool, but I hate it so much.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's missing good arranging. It's missing that. It's not been properly arranged. It's been just straight ported, and it doesn't work. It's like if you replace the jazz quartet with other instruments. Sorry, Ben.
I said it's the stuff that like your non-musician aunt will send you in like some sort of chain email. Like, thought you'd like this.
Yeah. Well,
that's very accurate.
But Casey's point then is a good arrangement is predicated on what? Knowledge.
Yeah.
Homework.
Like y'all said.
Homework.
And deep study of whether it's harmonic work or whatever it is that goes into making a good arrangement, and that doesn't happen overnight, and it's not just random. You know what? I don't know, in whatever, whether it's film or dance or whatever. If you're going to do a hybridization, you have to bring knowledge to the table, in my opinion.
Yeah, and also I think, that knowledge also, tying the ethno thing back into it or being super aware and knowledgeable of the culture and, if there are power structures that are present in this music and if there, are gender inequalities or whatever and all those things that someone to make this music maybe has suffered a lot, and then it feels like we're just stealing it and appropriating it, if you don't do that, again, to use the word homework.
Amen.
So
Amen.
Important. I always am trying to, I live in the middle of Missouri, so we don't have West African and Cuban artists just like passing through on I-70 all the time. So it takes a lot of work to bring people here, but I believe so strongly in that if we are going to study, we're studying Shona music from Zimbabwe, on a weekly basis. And I make it a point to find money to bring a Zimbabwean at least once a year. So that the students are so not only so that the students are interacting and learning from a master musician of that culture that we're studying, but also to support those musicians because there is 92% unemployment rate in Zimbabwe, and they need to be aware of that, Yeah.
Well put. Very well put.
This might be a good segue to my topic.
Laurel said something cool real quick. I wanted her to share. It's related to this cross style thing.
Oh yeah, it was just this is what bothers me in theatrical percussion pieces. Which I think I've ranted about before adequately with Mark Applebaum.
Yes.
But it can be so insulting when you watch someone try to perform this theatrical percussion piece and it's just...
And they're bad at acting.
They're just bad. And everything is like miming of like, and now I'm reaching. And it is like, oh my God, it's just so infuriating. And
Laurel, does that bother you for pieces that are constructed poorly too? I mean, when composers are writing when they have no background or have done no research on theater, or does that bother you as well? Because I'm thinking also of like world percussion instruments, in quotations that are inserted into Western percussion pieces where you're like, what are you doing here? Do you have
right?
Where's the context,
Yeah, it does, I think. And I think it's more in the execution for me of just watching people just butcher things. And I do have, about just throwing in an instrument. I was accompanying a big choir festival, and there was a djembe added to this particular song. And I looked at the score and I was like, I can play that as a very beginner adequately, but I hope he doesn't expect me to do that for this piece because I'm supposed to play piano. And then I thought, wait, the region this is from, they don't even play djembe there. Yeah. And I was actually really pleased when I showed up to the first rehearsal and the conductor said, everybody, just so you know, there's no djembe in this because that's not appropriate to the culture. They didn't play that there. And the arranger is wrong. And I was like, yay.
Again, someone who cares enough at least to comment.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, Ben, what's the big deal?
My real world experience with this is that when I interviewed for my job here at Tarleton State University, I, of course, had to teach the percussion ensemble. And so, of course, I asked, what are they playing? And I was told they're playing a piece called Taiko. And it was just
Taiko.
Sort of, it was like someone that heard taiko drumming on the radio one time and wrote a piece based on what they heard.
I know that piece.
And of course I couldn't walk in and be insulting to it, so I had to so I actually did research on taiko drumming beforehand and said oh, that's representing this drum or something like that. But yeah, sometimes we come up to these situations and just kind of
put on a headband?
I did not, but
to be
boy, it was something else.
You talk about the Karate Kid parts 1, 2, and 3.
Oh boy!
And I apologize to that composer, but your work was terrible.
Well, that's a good. Well, I mean, that's a good question, though. I mean, is that the work's fault? Is that people not knowing how to present it?
When it's I don't know.
Would it be better just to not play that at all?
Yeah, it's because maybe these students would never be exposed to taiko drumming otherwise, and maybe that's better than just showing them a recording of it that they actually get to do it. But it just seemed like it didn't. I feel like if that piece was well researched, it should have had an appendix with it that explained what the instruments were and said these rhythms were taken from such and such festival and so on. And it, like I said, it just seemed like someone heard taiko drumming on the radio one time and wrote a piece kind of based around that.
Yeah. Hey, let's move on to Megan's topic.
In other words, shut up and let's get on.
Yeah, before Ben gets the podcast sued, let's move on.
Before Ben has an aneurysm.
Yeah, and if anybody can piss off Ben anymore along the way, that'd be great. That's all right, Ben. That was fun. Hey everyone, we're going to go ahead and stop this portion of the conversation now. We continue on for another hour, and we'll continue that on the next episode. So that'll be episode 116. Okay, thanks everyone. Bye-bye.